Have you ever known someone who went missing or was murdered? What happened? One of my college professors from about 7 years ago when I first started school at the community college level disappeared. Nobody knew he was missing until the semester started and he didn't show up. They backtracked and realized the last time someone saw his was several weeks prior. No evidence of a break-in at his place. No evidence that he ran away. No criminal history. Nothing. Just gone. Been missing since. My mom is a part-time nanny and watches kids from time to time. Recently she was watching a 2-year-old baby boy from since when he was a newborn. One day his mom picked him up after work from our house claiming that she was receiving messages from angels sent from God and hearing voices in her head. My parents were reluctant to let her leave with her son, but she insisted that everything was okay and she was going to go talk to someone about it. The next day she never dropped off the baby boy at our house or answered her phone, so my dad got worried and drove over to her condo. The cops had taped off the entire neighborhood and were not letting anyone into her condos. We found out about an hour later that she had stabbed her baby to death and lit a fire in her condo in the middle of the night. It was absolutely devastating in our community as well. My family was heartbroken. How heartbreaking. I'm so sorry. I did, but no one really knows what happened. He was 17 and had a bit of an argument with his mother. The next day he got the bus into town for a haircut, where my gran saw him. They just happened to get the same bus back, bumped into each other again in town, making her one of the last people to see him. No one knows what happened after that. No one saw him for the next 2 months. The house and area was searched, but all they learned was that his phone charger and passport were still at home. Finally the police searched the garden again, and that time they found his body, or what was left of it. I have no idea how no one smelled it. It was the hottest part of the year. The coroner could never find a cause of death, only that it wasn't drink or drugs. One of my friends in high school had his little brother go missing. This was in 2004 and he has still never been found. It's a pretty high profile case and I've seen it posted on Reddit a bunch and seen a few popular podcasts do episodes on it. Basically he was on a scout camp out with his dad and they went fishing early in the morning. He got his shoes and socks wet and went to walk back to the camp, which wasn't very far away, and was never seen again. The whole town was talking about it for weeks. Tons of search and rescue volunteers were out looking but came up empty. His family was so strong during all of it. You could tell they were hurting, but they really came together and the community around them did too. My friend never talked about it much other than telling me how hard it was to not have any idea what happened or where his brother was. That would haunt me forever. He's a much stronger man than me. I believe this was covered on The Vanished. I cried so much. I felt so bad for everyone involved. My girlfriend went missing for 7 years. Law enforcement informed her family, the ones that filed the missing persons reports, that she was found safe and alive but wouldn't disclose her whereabouts. Bittersweet ending to all that. A friend of mine called an up and vanished one spring day in 1997 with his dog and a duffel bag, telling the neighbors he'd be back in a few days. As far as his parents could tell, the only things missing from his room were some t-shirts, a bong, and his spare eyeglasses. So they weren't worried. He'd even left his car and keys. Still, after a week without word, his parents reported him missing. Police, at least according to his mother, were useless. Writing the whole thing off as young adult decides to go find himself as soon as they found out he'd bought camping supplies and beer the day he disappeared. The police were right. Dan turned up 4 years later, announcing he was alive by walking into the bar his uncle owned, with the dog, to say hello. Seems he'd gone to an outdoor festival, ran into a guy he went to high school with, and got offered a job doing lighting. After a year of traveling from one show to another, he got a more or less steady gig at an arena in Texas, which led to a side job doing community theater, a wife he met when she auditioned for a Tennessee Williams play, and finally a baby on the way. My neighbor was murdered. This happened about 20 years ago. Apparently, he was having some work done in his house and got a little too friendly with the worker. He let it slip he had a lot of money in house. About a week after he finished the job, the worker came back, broke into the house and shot him. Holla shit. My senior year of high school, a 12-year-old was killed for her bike. The murders were teenagers who put her body in the recycling bin. There was a prayer vigil the night before they found her. I stood next to the boys. They were laughing and acting like nothing was going on. Less than 24 hours later, they were arrested. It was a small town, so I her family. It's still such a hard thing to think about. Growing up, one of my family friend's oldest daughter was missing. I was too little to remember meeting her, so all growing up I just heard about my friend's sister. She had always been somewhat troubled and got in with a bad crowd. When she was 16 she just disappeared one day. Her mom kept doing everything she could to find out anything, but there were no leads. No one could find anything on her, and because of her age lifestyle, after years of nothing they were afraid she was dead. Then one day out of the blue, after more than 10 years of nothing, they got a phone call that just said, "Mom, it's me." Turns out that she moved across the country with some creep. She eventually got smart and left him, but was too ashamed to call home. When she finally did call home, not only were they overjoyed that their long lost daughter was alive, but she was also doing incredibly well. She'd gotten her life together, gotten engaged, went to college, had a good job as well as an amazing husband and young son. Since she reunited with her family she has gotten to know her younger siblings, who were toddlers when she left, and they have gotten to know her husband, and son. She still lives across the country from them, but she continues to do really well and they've all built a great relationship with one another. Quite refreshing to read one with happy ending among so many death stories. A woman I went to church and later university with as a kid. I maybe talked to her casually in passing. She was a few years older than me and our social circles did not overlap, but she was always kind of a golden child. Sang in the choir, graduated with good grades and went on to medical school. She moved away to her new state to start her training as a psychiatrist, but went mysteriously missing after a few months. Her disappearance spread rapidly on social media because she was so universally liked. Then weird stuff started coming out of the woodwork. Her ex-husband came forward and said that she always struggled with mental health, and it was one of the things that led to their breakup. A famous gospel singer claimed that she had been stalking him for years through phone calls, social media videos referring to herself as his wife, had written him hundreds of letters, and had even contacted his children. This had led him to file a restraining order against her. A surveillance video surfaced of her attempting to check into a hotel several miles away from where she worked, offering cash and then being erratic when they wouldn't accept it. She was wearing dark clothes and sunglasses at 3 AM and refused to provide it. The video showed her ducking and weaving behind cars in the parking lot, as if hiding from something. They found her car 100 miles away from town with a flat tire. Her wallet and it were inside. Dogs followed her trail to the interstate, where they lost the scent. That was the last thing anyone heard about the case for several months. They found a body in a lake nearby that was supposedly identified as her by dental records. If I recall correctly, they ruled the death an accidental drowning, but the circumstances leading up to it make the whole thing sounded super sketchy. Last part sounds like paranoid schizophrenia. My 4th grade teacher was asleep on the couch when her college-aged son stabbed her to death. He's out of prison now. I think he served 20 years. The thought of giving birth to your own murderer is especially horrifying to me. My 3rd grade student was found murdered on top of her murdered grandmother in their bathtub. 10 years later, they caught the guy. It was the creep in the apartment that lived above them. The surviving mother had turned him down on a date. How terrible. Yes, and it's a heavy one. I lived in an apartment with my mom and brother when I was around 5-6, and there was a family that lived above us that had 2 girls that were around my age. A few months into living in that apartment, my mom started babysitting those girls at least once a week. My mom started to get really weird feelings and red flags from the parents and just knew something wasn't right. One of the girls was special needs, and the way she would cling to my mom for dear life made us all feel a little off. My mom suspected they were neglected or abused but could never do anything about it because she never had any evidence. However, I do believe the parents did end up having CPS called on them a few times. My mom at one point even tried to make friends with the crappy parents just to try and snoop around. Nothing ever came of it though. A few years later, we have moved out of that apartment, and for the first year my mom tried her best to keep contact, but not being in the same building as them made it hard to stay in touch. My mom thought everything might be okay until one day, she's watching the local news and sees the parents' mugshots on TV being sentenced to prison for the murder of their special needs daughter. My mom was devastated for so long after this and blamed herself for so much. I remember staying with my dad a lot at those times. I didn't understand much at that time, but now it's so heartbreaking to think of because I had such a good time with those girls. This friend of mine's parents were killed in cold blood in 2016 while trying to help a friend of theirs cool down a domestic dispute. The woman's husband got a gun and shot both my friend's mom and dad dead. He's now rotting in prison, where he belongs, but the community felt the sting, big time. My childhood friend was killed by her father because his wife had cheated on him with another man. I had given her some of my clothes because when he found out, the mom and my friend just left without anything. One day he went and picked her up from the sitter's house and he killed her and then tried to kill himself, but he didn't die. I remember going to her funeral and seeing where he had stabbed her on the chest because they just sort of put gauze dressing over it, and from the mother hugging on her. The collar of the dress was kinda pulled down when I got to see her. She was 10. That just makes me sick at heart. Wish her post-father had just taken himself out. Killing your child to get back at your ex is so selfish and depraved. People like that don't deserve kids. One of my college professors didn't show up to the final and found an article online she was found dead in the trunk of a car driven into a pond. Jesus Christ, that poor lady. My dad is 8 years missing, legally dead. He was struggling with drugs and homelessness, and one day he was gone. This is what's going to happen with my brother, if it hasn't already. We haven't heard from him in a while. I'm so sorry about your dad. My brother went to a job interview and never came home. His bike was found chained up in town and his CV scattered along mudflats. I saw him everywhere. I chased strangers down the street thinking it was him. It was all over the news. People were calling with sighting of him hitchhiking in various locations and even boarding a ship. One morning 7 years later I was woken by my mum to say he had been found by a kayaker about 3 km downstream from where he was last seen, still wearing the same clothes he went for an interview that day. Heartbreaking. I'm so sorry. My aunt's mother has been missing for nearly 40 years. There's a lot of weird stuff that points to her recent, at the time, ex-husband being a pretty likely suspect, but there just isn't enough evidence to tie him to anything. No cell phone records or traffic cameras back then. Her car was found on the side of a highway in Sussex County, Delaware, unlocked. A girl in our grade went missing, but she was already 18 and didn't have many friends. It felt like no one noticed, and my teacher told me the school wasn't responsible because she is of age. I asked why it seemed like nobody knew, and she just said she suspects it's just that nobody cared. It broke my heart even though I never knew the girl and wouldn't even know how to help. It struck me. I never found out what happened to the girl. My babysitter was murdered by her boyfriend when I was 7 years old. I used to be left in the same room with this man on multiple occasions. Once, he chewed my babysitter's driver's license up and blamed it on me. He was in his 20s at least, and even at 7, I knew this was odd behavior, so I refused to be in the same room with him alone again. Not 2 weeks after that incident, he smothered her with a pillow, killing her and her unborn child. College buddy who moved to Illinois to study law. They found his car parked on a bridge over the Mississippi River with the lights on, door open, and keys in the ignition. His home was fine in all ways except his phone was in the trash. A day before his funeral mass, another college buddy got all his cigar collection in the mail saying he hopes he enjoys them. He had been making plans to come visit a third college buddy for weeks. No warning signs. No suicide note. No body ever recovered. Nothing. Phil is just gone. My sister's high school math teacher. I met her a few times, but never really talked. She was stabbed to death by her boyfriend with a box cutter in a parking lot on Christmas Eve. A girl I went to high school and middle and elementary, classic New England town, with was murdered in college. The couple who killed her were convicted, but since they threw her body in the ocean right before a big storm, Her remains have never been found. I'm just glad those suckers got convicted. They figured out who she had been with last when she disappeared pretty quick due to cell phone texts, I think. The girlfriend then flipped on the boyfriend and ratted him out. I read her testimony once a few years ago. Never again. I think they were trying to trick her into something sexual under the rouse of just hanging out. And then when she didn't want to do stuff with them, he strangled her. The press marketed it as a sexual threesome gone wrong. But that's not what happened, and I don't want to remember her like that. She was super sweet. We sat next to each other on the bus in elementary school and she won prom queen in HS. She made her own prom dress. Really deserved it. She wasn't very popular or anything. She was just super sweet, kind, and a bit shy. R.I.P. Lizzie. I went to college with Lizzie. I didn't know her personally but had heard rumors about a guy harassing staff at a local Stop and Shop. And after the news came out, those staff identified that it was him. What horrible people those two were. I think of Lizzie often. I hope she's okay wherever she is, and that she knows people think kindly of her. My cousin's best friend went missing. People searched all night for her. Her boyfriend was helping with the search. I don't recall the exact details, but when they found the girl's body, the police began to suspect the boyfriend. Her family suspected him all along. They told of times when he would stare at her and say things like, "I was just imagining what it would be like to shoot you." OMG. Something similar. My aunt was missing for some time. Her husband helped search with family for about 2 weeks. Her best friend kept trying to tell everyone that he was abusive, but no one believed her. And one day in the middle of the search, he just confessed and guided them to where the body was. My small town of about 2,000 people had an incident where a dad and son got in a dispute over cash in their family business. The son went out to his dad's acreage and they got into it. Dad was able to drop his son with a shot to the leg. Dad finished his son off point blank in the face at the end of the driveway next to the highway. Jumped to mom calling the police and a standoff ensued. The dad was taking shots at officers while at the same time burning the cash he kept at the house. Estimate was $60 to $70k in the house in cash. The house caught on fire due to the sizable pile of cash he was burning. This being rural Midwest, SWAT wasn't there for a good 30 minutes or so. By the time SWAT arrived, he had let his wife out of the house and he shot himself inside the house. I knew both but knew the old man better from being on a bowling league with him. 100% normal acting person. Both of them. Just flipped his trigger one evening. House and acreage still stand but now overgrown and rundown. You can still see the burn marks on the house. When I was a kid, my best friend's older brother just disappeared one day. Honestly, we didn't care at the time because he was a dong to us. But it's been about 16 years. No body was found, and the going theory since we lived in a bad part of town with a lot of gangs is he joined a gang and ran away from home. Unfortunately, gangs aren't like the circus. They don't travel in packs and from city to city, not keeping any identities. The older sister of a girl I became friends with in high school was murdered by a coworker. It's a sadly familiar story. He was an outcast. She was nice to him, and he mistook her kindness for interest. She wasn't, and he couldn't handle the rejection. So he strangled her and dumped her body in a drainage ditch. Her family was just shattered. I can't even imagine. These stories are reminding me that I need to just not be so nice. I can be nice, but I'm naturally too nice. And not street smart in the slightest. Every guy I make friends with eventually has to ask what we are, and I'm baffled. Like, it's obvious to me that we are just friends. I'm going to end up dead if I don't just stop making friends. A girl I hardly knew in high school went missing one spring day. They found her in a field about 3 months later. They figured she rolled up her coat and used it as a pillow. Took a bottle of sleeping pills and went to sleep watching the sky. Another guy I hardly knew in the Philippines. I don't even remember his name anymore, but he worked as a tech at the Air Force radio station at Clarkab. I talked to him a few times. One night, he was walking back onto the base. He was just 100 feet or so from the gate when a bunch of Filipinos surrounded him. He tried to tell them he had no money, but according to witnesses, one of the Filipinos said, "We are not robbers. We are Reds, and you are the first to die." He was shot in the groin. and then in the back of his head before they all fled. He was the first victim of the Sparrow groups of the communist insurgency. That one really caught us a little off guard. The first one seems like a pretty nice way to die, as sad as it is. If I were to suicide, then I'd want to die peacefully under the stars like that. One of my best friends is currently missing from central Pennsylvania. She's been gone since the end of last year. I'm struggling to accept that she's gone, not knowing what gone means. I can't imagine that she would skip town, leaving behind her kids, family, and friends. Not do I want to imagine the alternative. I don't live in Pennsylvania, so it seems worse because I truly can't do anything. All I know is that I miss and love her. I hope she is found okay. I'm so sorry. I knew a girl very well that was murdered where she worked. She worked at a convenience store that was right in front of a very rough neighborhood. She was a really cocky chick and carried a pistol in her back pocket at all times. One night a crackhead came in and took her gun and shot her several times in the torso. She was kind of slumped behind the counter after being shot, but before he left he put the last round in her head from under the chin, killing her instantly. None of the other wounds would have been life-threatening. He had the money. She was down. He killed her anyway for no reason. He was caught a few weeks later by robbing another nearby store. This time he had his own gun, held it up to the cashier's head, and pulled the trigger, but it was jammed up. He pistol whipped her and left. She survived and was able to identify him, and they were then able to prove he did the other one at that point. What's pathetic is that the store she was killed in was closed only for a week while they cleaned her blood and brains out, then reopened with no new safety features. No cameras, no panic button, no cashier protection of any kind. Just right back in business like nothing happened. Aunt became a transient after a drug addiction. Her remains were found in a field thousands of miles from home. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head. She was identified with an old driver's license on her person and dental records. A kid at a neighboring school of mine was 16 when he was murdered by his friends. Kid's truck was found burned and they found his body not far from it in the woods. Apparently it was all over some weed money, but everyone loved this kid. Super nice, active in the community, went to church, had a decent home and a girlfriend. They hit him in the head and he passed out. Woke up while they drove him out to the woods while he cried and begged for them to help him. Dragged him into the woods and shot him. We have a lot of gang activity, even young kids getting into gang crap, but nothing ever happened like this before. Whole area was devastated. Trials still going because of so many variables. There was the driver, kids who didn't go to the woods but were present for the clubbing, kids who watched while he got shot, the ones that burned his truck and helped hide the body. Hard to know who to convict with murder, assisting in a murder, whether to charge them as juveniles or adults. Ages ranged from I think 16, 21 or something like that. Thankfully nobody got away scot-free, but it still rings in the community after like 5 years. Frick it. Charge them all with murder one. Let their lawyers prove they weren't. A friend of mine, let's call him Jeff, got into a fender bender with a soldier. Nothing major. They exchanged information and went their separate ways. Jeff back to the house he was staying in with 3 subletters. At around 11 PM this soldier came armed to Jeff's house, woke everybody up at gunpoint and took them outside. He had everyone lie face down on the grass while he spoke to Jeff. The flatnuts couldn't make out the soldier's words, but Jeff was just trying to calm him down. After a minute the soldier put his gun to Jeff's side, just under the armpit basically, and pulled the trigger. Jeff was killed instantly. The soldier was arrested and let out on a technicality. He's still free. Frick the heck what? A former co-worker of mine went missing a few weeks before this last Christmas. They found evidence of blood in her home. Then a few days for Christmas they found burned her remains about an hour outside of town. Her husband murdered her in a rim-fueled jealous rage. Still processing that she's gone. My uncle went missing when I was 13. I think he's out there somewhere and alive and well, but he's gay and at the time, our family and community wasn't accepting, especially since he'd been married at the time. I think he upped stakes and changed his name and is living his best life somewhere else. Also, I'm kind of missing. You can guess my family is crap. Like they're really, really crap. And one of my biggest fears is my mother finding me. Since I last talked to any family member 20 plus years ago, I've moved to the other side of the country. There are of course people who know where I am, but no one that knows them. I could be found easily enough if they really wanted to, probably, because technology, but I highly doubt I have any immediate family members who know where I am. Be safe and be well. I hope your uncle is doing great. There was a Toronto rapper that was pretty popular amongst my school and the GTA. I even met and talked to him in person. I think it was probably 1 or 2 years ago that he was shot in the head, and someone recorded it. R.I.P. Smoker Dog. My neighbor from down the street was a nice old man. He kept homing pigeons and we would always say hello as I walked to and from school each day. One day he was gunned down in broad daylight. It turned out he was actually very high up in the mafia and was executed in retaliation for other killings. That's insane. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.